Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Interesting Ideas. I'm Stan Houston. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you responding to the many stories that I tell, and I'm certainly looking forward to the fact that you will begin more and more to tell me your stories, because within every story, there is a story that will connect with us all, and in your story, there's probably something that all of us can learn. So let's remember that. Well, it happened again to me. I keep thinking maybe it won't, but it did. I looked at the calendar and November 30th, boom, there it was. Once again, I remembered the 1st of December. And you know what? I think I remembered it almost every day of the 1st of December of my life. And so if I could, I'd like to tell you about it and perhaps see if it could mean something to you, and will give you some sense of maybe curiosity, perhaps a way to say a prayer for all those that were involved, and perhaps even to think about how blessed we might be in what we have today. Remembering December 1st, 1958, I'm Stan Houston. Interesting Ideas, and the program begins right now. Yes, December 1st. That's right. There I was. I was just finished doing school at the Elson Junior High School in Michigan City, Indiana. And, I was a kid who always worked. That's what we did. And there I was. I actually was a paper boy when they actually had paper boys. And what that amounted to was quite a serious responsibility. That meant that every day after school, I'd have to jump on my bike and run down to the News Dispatch, which was the local newspaper in Michigan City. And I had a paper route. And that meant every day I had to go and pick up some papers. And by the way, I had to pay for them. That's how it worked. What the deal was is that what happened is that I would get 6 papers a week. And for that, I had to pay the News Dispatch a quarter. That's right. They gave me a newspaper Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And on Saturday, I had to pay 25 cents for those newspapers. But then I had to go out and I had to collect 35 cents from the people that I delivered them to. And so there I was. Hopefully the people would pay me, because whether they paid me or not, I still had to pay the newspaper office. And sometimes I still remember a number. It was a poor area of the town that I went through, and there were times when people just said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Stan, but I ain't got no money right now. But I'll try and pay you next week." Well, that's the way it was being a real paper boy at that particular time. It was a cold day, and so I made my way down, and it was the 1st of December, 1958, and all of a sudden, even as I kind of drove into the paper office, and it was where all the presses were going and everything else, and where the papers came out, and the news was just breaking. And I remember they finally put part of it on television, and what happened was that a fire had broken out in the city of Chicago. Now, we were about 50 miles from Chicago, so kind of an extended part of greater Chicagoland, though, of course, that part of the world would never admit it or say such a thing. But there was a fire in a large Catholic school called Our Lady of the Angels, and it was going terrible. And all of a sudden, the picture started to come down of not only the terrible fire, but children jumping out of the windows, some of them with their clothes and their hair on fire. And I remember I was just frightened and scared beyond means to watch it, but I had to deliver the papers. And I still remember what happened was I was folding the papers and putting them into the kind of folder that you put it in so you could deliver them to paper. And I just started to cry. I just started to cry as I thought about that. But I had to do my work, and of course I went and delivered the papers, and of course December 1st, usually it was dark by the time I was done with my papers, so at that time I usually had to have, and it cost me some extra money, I bought a 3-cell flashlight, which I then clamped on to the front of my old second-hand Schwinn bike. And I was so proud to finally have a Schwinn bike, but of course it was a second-hand bike because our family couldn't afford a new one, but I'd worked very hard and I at least gotten, after 3 years of saving my money, I'd been able to get a used Schwinn bike, and it was very nice. I thought it was wonderful. And that's what I used to deliver my papers. And of course, during the entire evening, throughout not only the Chicagoland TV stations, which we got in Michigan City, Indiana, but by this time it was obviously national news. And then people were hoping for the best, but as things began to clear out, and there is one classic picture, an iconic picture, and you might want to check it, and it's the picture of this poor fireman coming out holding the body of a dead young boy. And there it was, and when all was said and done, some of you, if you're of age and stage, remember it was found out that 92 children and 3 of the nuns had perished in Our Lady of the Angels fire. And for some reason, every December 1st, that has come back to me. I keep wondering why I don't forget it. I think, well, okay, eventually I won't remember that anymore. But here I am. And it is the 30th of November, and that means I'm thinking about December 1st tomorrow, and once again I'm remembering that sad, sad situation of the Our Lady of the Angels fire. And so I just wanted to share that with you because who knows what goes into our psyche sometimes and what goes into the memories that we have, both good and bad. But that's one that comes to me. If you want to know the story, you can go to Wikipedia, and I went back, and they now have done a fairly significant work of art, obviously. What happened was that it was in many cases a bit of a scandal because everyone's looking for a scandal, and there was a number of things they found that went wrong. What finally came out of that turns out to be fairly significant. So I guess in some very sad way that the death of those 92 children may have saved the lives of many more. But you still wonder why. I oftentimes say at this stage in my life, and it's part of the working philosophy right now, those of us who particularly look for meaning in our lives and look for meaning in our faith, I say sometimes we wish that there was a big button, and we call it the explain button. And at least once a day we get to punch the button, and then perhaps God has to explain why that happened. Well, none of us have an explain button, and perhaps that's part of the mystery of faith and hope, is that in so many ways we have to deal with the great, both the wonderful and, of course, the terrible mysteries. I'm Stan Houston. Just some thoughts on December 1st. I'll point out that some good things did happen, and we'll close with that and send you on your way this rather cold and cool and rainy November day. For he careth Well, of course, part of the so-called scandal wasn't a scandal at all, but it was just the way things were, It was an older building, and it had a fire escape, and it had passed a fire inspection. But, there was just so many things that couldn't be counted on. And then, of course, where did the fire begin? That was never fully determined. Later on, one of the children, who was 10 years old, claimed that he had actually set the fire. And oh my goodness, that made it even worse. Well, the problem was that under interrogation or questioning, it turned out that there was no real evidence that he really had, and that who knows what to believe, and the fire remained undetermined. But of course, then we discovered that there were a lot of things that changed. All of a sudden, school safety became a major issue. And so the issues of fire escapes and fire retardant buildings and fire doors, many of the things that we now will, of course, take for granted in the construction of any public building, and particularly in any school building. All of those things that we now take for granted as safety mechanisms for fire. Now, unfortunately, we are still learning now how to do safety mechanisms for something much worse, and that, of course, is the plague of school shootings. And we haven't gotten very good at that, but we're working on it. But that was a thing that did come out, and as a result of the death and obviously the families that were devastated, back just a few years ago, again, I remembered it. And so guess what happened? I went and looked around the Chicagoland radio stations and TV stations, and there actually was. Now, it wasn't nationwide, but it was in Chicago. They actually had an interview with a man who was a survivor of the fire. And he simply talked about how fortunate he was to be alive, and he knew some of the people who had died and how sad it was. And he pointed out that there were obviously just families that were devastated. It's not only terrible to lose a child, but to lose a child in such a way. And of course, the guilt and the wondering what might have been, all of the stuff that goes into sometimes the tragedies of life. And then it was closed on a hopeful, optimistic note that some way, in just the fact that we remember and that we honor those people. And there were, of course, within that tragedy, there were stories of great heroism on the part of some teachers. Some of the ones who died, obviously died saving the lives of children. All of that came forward, and now today we remember once again. And it just simply makes me take a moment to pause and think about, I could have been of that age. I was in the 8th grade myself. If I'd have been in that school, they were people my age. And here I am, obviously many years later, and I have been blessed that I have lived well and been blessed in so many ways. And all of those wonderful children did not have any of those opportunities. We don't say c'est la vie, such is life, but it is. And it asks us to pause, perhaps, and think about the mystery of life, and perhaps maybe more and more the meaning of life. And then, of course, December 1st, coming to the end of the year, perhaps once again we take time to ask some of the big questions about life and see if perhaps in the coming year, both in our life and business, we might make some real progress in answering some of the big questions. I hope to do that, and maybe in some way you can join me in saying, in the mess we're in, again, what are some of the big questions in life that we should seek, at least as best we can, to answer as best we can. I'm Stan Houston. The program is Interesting Ideas. I have nothing to pitch today. It's not a pitching time. It was just a memory time. And as I sat there and discovered, sitting here in the studio, November 30th and December 1st, it's just something that I wanted to tell you what I remember about it. If perhaps I can be helpful in either way, you know who I am and what I do. And if I can be helpful to you, I would be grateful for the opportunity to at least pay back in some way the blessings I have, because I have lived a good and long life, and I'm very grateful. Best and blessings to you, stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com. All the best and blessings. Pray for our children. I really mean that. Pray for our children. Bye for now.